My name is Erin Whitaker, and I was 34 years old when my brother handed me an eviction notice at our mother's funeral luncheon. Not the next week. Not when the casseroles were gone and the sympathy cards had stopped arriving. At the luncheon, there was still potato salad on paper plates in the church basement. My mother's friends were still hugging each other beside the coffee urn. The white carnations from her casket were sitting in the corner in a plastic bucket because my sister said they were too depressing to put on the tables. I was standing near the sink, washing serving spoons because I had been doing dishes at family gatherings since I was 12, when my brother Caleb walked over in his navy suit and placed a folded packet beside the coleslaw. He said, "We need you out of Mom's house in 30 days. For a second, I thought grief had broken my hearing.
What?
My sister Mallory appeared behind him, wearing black heels and the calm face she used with difficult real estate clients.
It's not personal, Erin, she said. The house has to be listed quickly. The market is hot, and we can't have you dragging this out.
The house. Not Mom's house. Not our childhood home. The house. The place where I had slept in the recliner beside my mother for 2 years because her lungs filled with fluid if she lay flat. The place where I had learned to change wound dressings, crush pills, argue with insurance, and memorize the difference between a pain grimace and a fear grimace. The place where I had bathed her with warm washcloths while Mallory sent heart emojis from Scottsdale and Caleb posted Bible verses about honoring your parents from a lake house he rented with money he borrowed from her. I looked at the packet.
At the words, "Notice to vacate," at my name typed in capital letters, Erin Marie Whitaker.
As if I were a tenant. As if I were a problem. As if my mother's body had barely cooled and the family had already turned me into an obstacle to the sale. Behind Caleb, my cousin Tessa whispered, "Oh my God."
Mallory heard her and said louder, "We're just trying to handle the estate responsibly." Caleb added, "Mom would want us to be practical."
That was when I almost laughed. Because if there was one thing my mother had hated, it was people using her name to dress up greed. But I did not laugh. I folded the notice once. Then again.
Caleb mistook my quiet for defeat.
He always had.
He leaned closer and lowered his voice.
"Look, Erin, we all know you lived there rent-free for years. Don't make us do this the hard way."
Rent-free?
That was what they called it. Not caregiving. Not sacrifice. Not the 4 years I gave up my apartment, my job at the clinic, my weekends, my sleep, my savings, and the last clean version of myself to keep our mother in the home she loved. Rent-free. Mallory touched my arm like she was comforting a client who had lost a bidding war. "We boxed up some of Mom's sewing things for you," she said. "That felt fair. You always liked the old stuff."
Then she smiled.
Not kindly. Efficiently. And honestly, it's more than most people would get after living off their mother this long. The church basement went very still. I could feel people pretending not to listen. I looked at my siblings, at Caleb, who thought being the oldest son made him the natural heir to everything he had not earned, at Mallory, who had already calculated her commission on the sale of our mother's house. And then I thought about the brown sewing basket in the trunk of my car, The one Mom had pushed toward me 3 weeks before she died, when her voice was almost gone, but her eyes were still sharper than anyone deserved. She had whispered, "If they try to make you leave, look under the blue thread." I had not opened it yet. I had been too tired, too sad, too afraid that the last thing my mother gave me would only smell like cedar and dust and goodbye.
But standing there with an eviction notice in one hand and my sister's smile in front of me, I suddenly understood that my mother had not been saying goodbye.
She had been giving instructions. So I looked at Caleb and Mallory and said, "I'll read this carefully." Mallory nodded, satisfied.
Caleb said, "Good, be reasonable."
I folded the notice again, slipped it into my purse, and went back to washing spoons. Because the first rule my mother taught me was simple. When people think they have already won, let them keep talking. My mother's name was Judith Whitaker.
She was 67 when she died, though she had looked older the last year because illness is a thief with no sense of proportion. Before the oxygen tank and the hospital bed in the dining room, before the pill bottles lined the kitchen windowsill like little orange soldiers. My mother was the kind of woman who made ordinary things feel deliberate. She ironed pillowcases. She labeled freezer meals with dates and jokes. She kept a jar of buttons sorted by color because one day a shirt will need a miracle. She sewed quilts for babies, wedding showers, veterans, foster children, widows, anyone starting over with more fear than furniture. People in Maple Ridge, Pennsylvania, called her Judy with the quilts, as if kindness were a trade. Maybe it was... She had 3 children. Caleb, the firstborn. Mallory, the shining one. And me, the one who stayed. Caleb was 42 when Mom died. A contractor when he had work, and a visionary when he did not. Visionary was his word for unemployed with confidence. He had a wife named Dana, 3 kids, 2 trucks, and a habit of borrowing money in amounts just small enough to make refusing feel cruel. Mallory was 39, a real estate agent in Arizona who called herself bi-coastal because she visited Pennsylvania twice a year and complained about humidity both times. She had perfect teeth, perfect hair, and the ability to make any room feel like a networking opportunity. I was 34, a medical office coordinator at a rehabilitation clinic before I quit to care for Mom. I was not married. I had no children. In my family, that meant my time was communal property. When Mom was first diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis, everyone promised to help. We were sitting at her kitchen table, the same table Dad had refinished before he died, the one with the burn mark from the Thanksgiving rolls of 1998. Caleb said, "We're a family. We'll rotate." Mallory said, "I can fly in 1 week a month." Dana said, "We'll all pitch in with meals." I believed them because hope is most dangerous when it sounds organized. For the first month, there was a schedule, color-coded. Mallory made it in an app and texted it with a little sparkle emoji. By the 3rd month, Caleb's Wednesdays became job site emergencies. Mallory's monthly visits became quarterly, then as needed. Dana stopped bringing meals after I asked if she could avoid cream sauces because Mom's stomach could not handle them. By the 6th month, the rotation had one name on it. Mine. I moved into Mom's house after she fell in the bathroom and lay on the tile for 42 minutes before she could reach the phone.
Just until we get better support, I told myself. That phrase lasted 3 years. I turned the dining room into a care room. Oxygen concentrator in the corner, medication table by the window.
A whiteboard with appointment dates and blood oxygen levels.
A baby monitor beside my bed so I could hear her at night. My own life folded smaller and smaller until it fit into the spaces between her needs. I do not regret caring for my mother.
I need that understood.
I regret that the people who praised themselves for loving her let me do it alone. There is a difference. At first, Mom apologized constantly. Every time I helped her stand. Every time I drove her to Pittsburgh for specialist appointments. Every time I canceled plans because her breathing changed. I am sorry, baby. I hated that. Mom, stop apologizing for being sick.
She would smile.
Then stop looking like someone stole your 20s. I'm 31. All the more tragic. That was Mom. Oxygen tube under her nose, still capable of sarcasm.
But the disease kept taking things.
Stares. Long conversations.
Showers without help. Needlework.
That was the cruelest. My mother's hands had made half the town warm. Now they trembled too much to thread a needle. One afternoon, she tried to sew a blue patch onto a quilt square and missed the fabric entirely. The needle sank into her finger.
She did not cry. I did. She looked at me and said, "Do not make my pain about your face."
I laughed through tears. She squeezed my hand.
"Erin, listen to me."
Whenever Mom said that, I knew something important was coming. Your brother and sister will count the rooms after I die. Mom.
They will. They will walk through this house and see square footage. They will see the oak floors, the updated kitchen, the backyard, the school district. Mallory will say market conditions. Caleb will say family fairness.
She paused to catch her breath. I waited. She hated being rushed more than being sick. You will be tempted to explain what it cost you to stay. I will. Do not. That surprised me. Why?
Because people who did not show up already know what they did. Explanation is just a free performance they do not deserve.
I looked at her. She tapped the arm of her chair twice, our signal for the notebook.
I brought it. She wrote slowly, letters crooked but readable.
Let documents speak.
Then she underlined documents twice.
I thought she meant medical records, care logs, receipts, the things I kept because the clinic had trained me to document everything. I did not know she meant deeds, trusts,
bank statements, and one letter hidden under a spool of blue thread.
The pressure started a year before she died. Mallory flew in for a weekend, wearing white jeans and carrying a laptop. That alone should have warned me.
Nobody wears white jeans to a caregiving house unless they plan to avoid all actual caregiving.
She waited until Mom was sitting in the living room with a blanket over her knees and her oxygen machine humming like a tired refrigerator. Then she said, "Mom, I ran a comparative market analysis." Mom looked at me.
I looked at the ceiling.
Mallory opened her laptop. The house is worth more than you think. With the market right now, we could list at $625, maybe more if we stage it properly.
Mom said, "Stage it?"
You know, remove clutter, neutralize the space, make it less medical. Less medical, meaning remove the bed that kept Mom alive.
The oxygen tanks, the lift chair,
The walker, me, Caleb, sitting on the couch with his boots on the coffee table, nodded.
would solve a lot of problems.
Mom turned to him. Whose problems?
He looked offended. All of ours. Maintenance is expensive. Taxes, utilities. Erin can't keep this place up forever.
I said, I handle the maintenance. Caleb ignored me. Plus, if we sell now, everybody gets their share while prices are high. Mom's eyes moved slowly from Caleb to Mallory. My share of my own house? Mallory's face softened into the expression she used in listing presentations when elderly clients resisted downsizing. Mom, we're thinking about what is best. No, Mom said. You are thinking about what is liquid.
Caleb muttered, "Here we go."
Mom heard him. She heard everything. That night, after they left, she asked me to bring her phone. Who are you calling? Miriam Bell. Your lawyer? My friend who happens to be a lawyer? I thought she wanted to update her will. In a way, she did. But Judith Whitaker had no intention of leaving the most important truth to be discovered in a public reading by people who measured love in percentages.
Miriam came the following Tuesday. Then again, 2 weeks later, with 2 witnesses.
Then a doctor came, independent, not one of Mom's specialists, and asked questions about presidents, dates, property, family relationships, and why she wanted to transfer ownership. Mom answered everything.
At the end, the doctor asked, "Mrs. Whitaker, why not simply divide the property equally among your children?"
Mom looked at me, then back at him. Because equal is not the same as honest. The doctor wrote that down. I remember because Mallory later tried to say Mom had been confused. Confused people do not define fairness better than a courtroom.
I did not know what was signed.
Not completely. Mom told me enough to understand she had handled the house, but not enough to make me feel like I was waiting for her to die. That was a mercy. And maybe another test.
She did give me the sewing basket 3 weeks before the end.
It was brown wicker with a cracked handle and a lining printed with tiny faded roses. She pushed it toward me with both hands. I was sitting beside the hospital bed, filing her nails because she hated feeling unkempt.
"This is she whispered.
Mom, I don't sew. You mend.
I tried to smile. Badly. Still. She tapped the lid. "Do not open it until you need it."
When will I need it? Her eyes met mine. You will know when they stop pretending.
I wanted to argue, to tell her Caleb and Mallory would not be that cruel.
That grief would soften them. That people behave better around death. But I had already seen Caleb measuring the garage with his eyes. I had already caught Mallory photographing the kitchen backsplash for a future listing file. So I took the basket,
Put it in my car.
and 3 weeks later, after her funeral luncheon, after the eviction notice, after rent-free, I sat in the church parking lot and opened it.
Inside were sewing scissors.
Needles, fabric scraps, a tomato-shaped pincushion, 3 spools of thread, red, white, blue.
I lifted the blue spool. Under it was a folded letter sealed with tape.
My name.
Erin.
My hands started shaking before I opened it. Mom's handwriting was uneven but stubborn. Baby, if you are reading this, your brother and sister have stopped acting.
I am sorry.
The house is not theirs to sell. It has not been for nearly a year. Miriam recorded the transfer on death deed and the trust documents in March. Upon my death, the house on Mill Road and the Archer Street rental passed to you outside probate. The accounts needed to maintain both properties are in the trust.
They will call you greedy. They will call you confused. They will say I was manipulated.
Let them.
You have the documents. Miriam has the originals. The county has the deed.
Do not sign anything. Do not move out.
Do not explain your value to people who counted your labor as rent.
You did not live off me. You kept me alive at home. Love, Mom.
P.S. There is a safety deposit key taped inside the pincushion. Bring it to Miriam before any family meeting.
I sat in the car until the parking lot emptied. Snow had started to fall, light and unsure. I held the letter against my chest and cried with no sound. Not because of the house, because my mother had seen me. Fully, precisely, legally. I called Miriam the next morning. She answered like she had been waiting.
Erin?
Yes. They gave you something. An eviction notice. A pause. Then she said, "Of course they did." That was when I laughed. A short, ugly laugh, but real. She told me to come in at 9 with the sewing basket, the notice, my identification, and any messages from Caleb or Mallory. By 8:30, I had 18 texts. Caleb,
do not make this messy.
Mallory, we need access for staging photos this week.
Caleb,
if you damage the house value, that comes out of your share. Mallory, you should be grateful we are giving you 30 days. Caleb, Mom babied you too much. Mallory, I know grief is hard, but this is adult life. I screenshotted everything, then drove to Miriam's office. She was 68, compact, and had the kind of white hair that looked less like age and more like authority. Her office smelled like paper, lavender, and old wood. On her desk was a folder labeled Whitaker Trust.
Seeing my last name on a legal document made my stomach flip.
Miriam read Mom's letter first. Slowly, her mouth tightened at the eviction notice. Then she opened the pincushion with a seam ripper and removed a tiny brass key taped inside the cotton.
Your mother enjoyed drama more than she admitted, she said.
She told me drama was inefficient. She lied. I smiled. It hurt. At the bank, the safety deposit box contained 3 things:
a certified copy of the transfer on death deed, a binder of financial records, and a flash drive labeled,
"If they call Erin a tenant."
Miriam looked at me.
Do you want to watch this now?
No.
I knew if I saw my mother moving on a screen that morning, I would fall apart. Miriam nodded. Then we will save it. What happens now?
Legally, the Mill Road house is yours. The Archer Street duplex is yours. The maintenance account attached to the trust is yours to administer. The will gives Caleb and Mallory specific cash gifts and personal items. They cannot sell property they do not own.
How much? Miriam did not pretend not to understand.
The house, duplex, and trust accounts are currently valued at roughly $2.4 million.
I stared at her. My mother's house had never felt like millions. It felt like soup simmering.
Oxygen tubes. Quilt scraps.
The hallway where Dad taught us to roller skate in socks. The window where Mom watched cardinals. Numbers can be true and still not be the point. Miriam folded her hands. Your siblings are scheduled to meet with the title company Friday. Mallory has already contacted a buyer.
She cannot do that.
No.
Miriam's eyes sharpened.
But I think we should let her try in front of witnesses. There are moments when you realize an older woman is not simply kind. She is armed. Friday morning, Mallory texted the family group chat. Final sale prep meeting at Keystone Title, 11 a.m. Erin, you need to attend to sign occupancy and access documents.
Occupancy. Access. Documents. She was very good at making theft sound procedural. I arrived with Miriam at 10:58. Caleb was already there in a gray suit that pulled at the shoulders.
Mallory had a leather portfolio and the bright expression of someone expecting commission.
The buyers sat across the table, a couple from Pittsburgh who looked uncomfortable before we even entered. The title officer, Mr. Gaines, had a stack of papers in front of him. He looked relieved to see Miriam.
That told me she had already called. Mallory's smile froze. Why is Miriam here? Miriam said, because your mother was my client.
Caleb leaned back.
Erin, this is unnecessary. I sat. Miriam placed a certified deed on the table. Before anyone discusses sale terms, access, occupancy, or listing agreements, we need to correct ownership. Mallory laughed. Not convincingly.
The house belongs to the estate.
No, Miriam said. It does not.
Mr. Gaines cleared his throat. I have reviewed the county recording. The transfer on death deed was executed and recorded last March, upon Judith Whitaker's death. Title transferred to Erin Marie Whitaker.
The room changed temperature.
Caleb sat forward.
What? Mallory's eyes flashed to the buyers. Then back to Miriam. That cannot be right. Miriam slid the document toward her. It is right. Caleb looked at me. You knew? I could have said no. Technically, I'd only known for 3 days. But that was not what he meant. He meant, did you know Mom loved you enough to protect you? So I said, Mom knew. Mallory snatched the deed.
She was sick. She did not understand what she was signing.
Miriam opened a second folder.
Independent capacity evaluation, dated 2 days before execution. Physician statement, witness affidavits, notary record, letter of intent. Caleb said, "This is manipulation."
Miriam looked at him. Your mother anticipated that word. Then she removed the flash drive. My throat tightened. I whispered, "Now?" Miriam asked softly, "Do you want to?" I looked at Caleb. At Mallory? At the buyers who had just realized they were extras in a family collapse? At Mr. Gaines, who stared at his coffee like he wanted to retire immediately? I thought about the eviction notice beside the coleslaw. Rent-free.
30 days. Be reasonable.
Yeah, I said. Miriam plugged the drive into the conference room screen. My mother appeared, sitting in her blue recliner, oxygen tube under her nose,
hair brushed,
quilt over her lap,
eyes clear.
My hand flew to my mouth. On the screen, she said, "My name is Judith Elaine Whitaker. Today is March 14th. I am making this recording with attorney Miriam Bell present because my children Caleb and Mallory have a talent for calling greed concern." Mallory whispered, "Oh my God." Mom continued, "I am transferring my home and the Archer Street duplex to Erin because Erin is the child who stayed. Caleb and Mallory will say she lived with me rent-free. That is false. Erin paid with time, wages, sleep, privacy, and health. She kept me in my own home when everyone else kept their distance and called it busy." Caleb looked away. Mom's voice grew thinner, but the words stayed sharp. "If you are watching this because someone has tried to sell my house out from under Erin, stop. The house is not yours. It was never promised to you. I love all my children. But love is not the same as inheritance. An inheritance is not a reward for appearing after the work is done." Mallory began crying. I knew that cry. It was the one she used when being seen accurately felt like an attack. Mom looked directly into the camera. "Erin, baby, do not argue with them. Documents speak longer than grief. Keep the house if you want it. Sell it if you choose. Turn it into something new, but do not let them tell you that staying made you small. You were the foundation." The video ended. No one spoke. Then, "Mr. Gaines said, very quietly, 'This sale cannot proceed.'" Mallory lost the buyers. Then she lost the listing. Then she lost more than that when Miriam filed a complaint with the State Real Estate Commission for attempting to market property without confirmed authority. Mallory called it a misunderstanding. The email trail called it something else. Caleb threatened to sue. Then Miriam sent his attorney the loan records from the trust binder. Over 8 years, Mom had given Caleb $76,000 in temporary help for equipment, payroll gaps, tax bills, and one suspiciously timed family vacation he had called a business retreat. The binder had copies of checks, texts, notes in Mom's handwriting. Caleb stopped threatening to sue and started asking about repayment plans. The will gave Caleb $15,000 and Dad's tools. It gave Mallory $12,000 and Mom's wedding china. Mallory called that insulting. I called it more than an eviction notice. They filed a petition anyway. Undue influence, diminished capacity, financial exploitation. The words looked ugly with my name beside them. For 2 months, I lived inside paperwork. Care logs, medical records, bank statements, videos, witness affidavits from hospice nurses, the capacity evaluation, the letter of intent, text messages where Caleb canceled visits, texts where Mallory asked for listing photos while Mom was still alive. At the preliminary hearing, Judge Corinne Mercer read quietly for nearly 20 minutes before looking up. She asked Caleb's attorney, "Do you have any evidence beyond dissatisfaction?" That sentence should have been framed. The petition was denied. The deed stood. The trust stood. The no contest clause froze Caleb and Mallory's cash gifts until the estate settled. Mallory left the courthouse without looking at me. Caleb stopped in the hallway. "You got what you wanted." I looked at him. "No, I got what Mom wanted." He opened his mouth, closed it. For once, He found no larger voice to hide in. I moved back into the Mill Road house legally that spring. I had never left physically, but there is a difference between occupying a house and being allowed to belong to it. For weeks, I changed nothing. Mom's cardigan stayed on the chair. Her mug stayed by the sink. The whiteboard still had her last oxygen numbers written in blue marker. Then one Saturday, I opened the windows. All of them. The house exhaled. I packed the medication table first, then the oxygen supplies, then the bedding from the hospital bed. I kept one quilt. Blue and yellow squares, uneven in one corner where Mom's hand had slipped before she admitted she could no longer sew. The Archer Street duplex had 2 long-term tenants, both elderly women who sent sympathy cards with $5 bills inside because that was how their generation expressed both grief and stubbornness. I returned the money and lowered their rent by $100 each. Miriam said, "That is your decision." Mallory said, "That is bad business." I said, "Good thing it is not your business." At the clinic where I used to work, I heard about caregivers who needed respite housing near the hospital. People sleeping in cars between appointments. Adult children who drove hours for treatment days. Spouses who could not afford hotels. The idea started small. 1 room. Then 2. By winter, I had renovated the upstairs of the Mill Road house into 3 short-term respite rooms for family caregivers. Nothing fancy. Clean beds. Good lamps. A shared kitchenette. A washer and dryer that did not require quarters. I called it the Judith rooms. The first guest was a woman named Renee, whose husband was receiving radiation in Pittsburgh. She cried when I showed her the shelf stocked with soup, tea, and crackers. "I can pay something," she said. "Pay what you can." "That is not a business model." "No," I said. "It is a promise." I did not tell her that the promise had been made in a letter under blue thread. A year after Mom died, Caleb came by. He called first. That alone was new. He stood on the porch with a paper bag from the bakery and looked older than his 43 years. "I brought rolls," he said. "Why?" He shrugged. "I did not know what people bring when they are not asking for money." It was almost funny. I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Mallory had once opened her laptop and called my mother's medical equipment clutter. Caleb looked around. "This place feels different." "It is different." "I heard what you are doing with the rooms." I waited. He swallowed. "I told people you were living off Mom." "Yes." I knew that was not true. "Yes." His eyes filled. He blinked hard, angry at them. I was jealous. That surprised me. "Of what?" "And that you knew how to be there. I would come in and see all the medicine, the machines, Mom looking small, and I would feel useless. So I made you smaller in my head. It was easier." It was not enough, but it was honest. Honesty is not a house. It is a brick. I accepted the brick. "Caleb, I am not erasing the repayment plan." "I know. I am not giving you part of the house." "I know." "Then why are you here?" He looked at the rolls. "Because I drove past 3 times, and if I did not stop, I was going to become someone Mom would not recognize." That sentence sounded like him and not like him. I took the rolls. "Coffee." He nodded. That was the beginning of something.
Not repair, not forgiveness. A beginning.
Mallory took longer. 16 months. She sent a letter, handwritten on expensive stationery because even apologies had branding in Mallory's world.
Erin,
I have written this badly 5 times. I do not know how to say I am sorry without making it about my guilt.
I called you a squatter in my head because if you were a daughter, then I was the daughter who left.
I hated that.
I hated you for making it visible.
Mom saw it before I did.
I am sorry for the notice, for the listing, for the way I treated your care like it was rent.
I am not asking for anything. Mallory,
I read it twice, then tucked it into the sewing basket.
Not because it fixed us.
Because my mother had taught me to keep documents.
The second Thanksgiving after Mom died, I hosted dinner at the Mill Road house. Not the old version. Not 15 people performing closeness over candied yams. A smaller table. Miriam came. Renee from the first Judith room came with her husband, who was in remission. My cousin Tessa came because she had whispered, "Oh my God," at the funeral luncheon, and later sent a text saying, "I should have said more."
Caleb came with Dana and the kids.
Mallory came alone. Drew is not in this story because I do not have a brother named Drew, though sometimes families seem to manufacture the same man under different names. That would have made Mom laugh. Before dinner, Mallory stood by the sink. "Do you need help with dishes?" I looked at her.
The question was careful.
So was my answer.
Yes.
She rolled up her sleeves. Badly. Water went everywhere. Caleb dried plates.
Dana put leftovers into containers.
For the first time in years, I sat down before the kitchen was finished. Nobody commented.
That was how I knew something had changed.
After everyone left, I went to Mom's sewing room.
The brown basket sat on the shelf. Inside were the letter, the deed copy, Mallory's apology, Caleb's first repayment receipt, and one blue spool of thread.
I picked up the thread and held it in my palm. Such a small thing.
A thing anyone else would have thrown away.
But that was the pattern in my life.
The small thing was never small. A letter under thread.
A deed at the county. A line in a care log.
A woman staying awake at 3 a.m.
A house that looked like property to everyone, except the person who knew where the oxygen tank scratched the baseboard.
If you are listening to this because you were the one who stayed, I want you to hear me.
They may call it rent-free.
They may call it helping out.
They may call it what you were supposed to do. They may show up after the funeral with spreadsheets, estimates, opinions, and clean hands.
Let them talk. Keep records.
Keep receipts.
Keep the letter.
But more than that, keep your understanding of what your time was worth. Caregiving is not nothing because it is unpaid. Love is not labor, only when someone else does it. And being available does not mean you are disposable. My family handed me an eviction notice at my mother's funeral luncheon. They thought that was the end of my place in the house.
They thought the woman who washed the serving spoons would pack quietly, leave quietly, and let them sell the walls that had hurt everything.
But my mother knew them. She knew me.
She knew that one day, someone would mistake my silence for permission. So she hid the truth under the blue thread and let the documents speak.
My name is Erin Whitaker. I was not the tenant. I was not the burden.
I was not living off my mother.
I was the daughter who stayed.
And when they tried to sell the house, I kept alive. The deed already had my name on it.
My name is Erin Whitaker, and I was 34 years old when my brother handed me an eviction notice at our mother's funeral luncheon. Not the next week. Not when the casseroles were gone and the sympathy cards had stopped arriving.
At the luncheon, there was still potato salad on paper plates in the church basement. My mother's friends were still hugging each other beside the coffee urn. The white carnations from her casket were sitting in the corner in a plastic bucket because my sister said they were too depressing to put on the tables.
I was standing near the sink, washing serving spoons because I had been doing dishes at family